President Cyril Ramaphosa has been accused by opposition parties of deflecting when it came to answering a question about the Phala Phala farm robbery in the National Assembly. So is there any possibility then that there may be a need to amend the rules of Parliament, perhaps in order to hold the likes of the President and the Executive accountable in a more effective way? Let's speak about this with constitutional law expert Pierre de Vos. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Grateful for your time. We'll get to the issues around accountability in Parliament as far as the rules are concerned shortly. But I want to hear from you then, as someone who has worked in the law space. Is there legitimate legal grounds for the President to not give a full account of what happened on his farm in 2020, pending the multiple investigations?
Well, there's nothing that prohibits the President from giving an account to Parliament. There's nothing in the law that says that it would be problematic. What might be a problem is if you are potentially a criminal defendant, then you don't necessarily want to answer questions because you don't want to implicate yourself. But if we assume that is not true, I don't know if it is or not, the explanation that is given that the process is continuing is not in a legal sense a credible explanation.
Mm-hmm. And the argument now, I was just speaking to the spokesperson for the President, Vincent Magwenya, is that we also can't divorce the politics from the broader saga. So it's a situation that is weighing law, accountability versus the political dynamics, which according to Mr. Magwenya, at least he inferred, are rather more shadowy.
Yes, so I, of course, don't know what the political machinations are behind the scenes. Generally, if you believe that in the constitutional requirements of openness, transparency, accountability, some of the founding values contained in the Constitution, then you are going to assume that no matter what the motives are of the people who are complaining or attacking you, openness and transparency is always better than being non-transparent and not being open, unless, of course, you have something to hide. So it seems to me strange. It doesn't sound that plausible if one assumes that if the public knew all the facts, the public will exonerate, so to speak, the President.
Right. Let's talk about Parliament and the rules then. Let's talk about law and whether the mechanisms of Parliament as far as accountability were used effectively, both in that Q&A session yesterday and more broadly in terms of what Parliament has done in its role when Phala Phala has come up.
Well, the Constitution actually empowers the Parliament and gives them enormous powers to summons people, to force them to answer questions. You can legally force people to bring evidence, documents, and so on, whether it's the President or whether it's Marcus Jooste or whoever else. And the rules then facilitate this. The problem is that Parliament, especially if the majority of the National Assembly members feel political allegiance, they do not always use these rules and the provisions in the Constitution and the rules to against people or to force people who are aligned to their political party to come and account. The questions of oral questions that would have to be answered in Parliament, the rules currently doesn't require or force the President, Deputy President, Ministers to actually answer the question properly. And that really is something that is left to the Speaker, but because the Speaker is also a member of the majority party, it is perhaps sadly inevitable that the Speaker is not going to be vigorous in enforcing accountability in that setting of actually answering questions in the National Assembly. Do
we need then a tightening of those rules? And I wonder how we would perhaps word or tweak them if we were to do that.
Yeah, I thought about this. This is very difficult because on the one hand, Parliament is a political body. It represents political parties and the members there are all politicians, and including the Speaker. So making changes to the rules it's sort of and thinking that this is purely a legal problem is probably wrong. And maybe what really is required, I would think, is that the rule should make it much clearer, and I don't know if this is really accepted politically by the governing party, that the speaker should be really impartial and neutral, and should, in exercise of discretion, should always be guided by the understanding that Parliament is the body to whom the executive is accountable and should act and should ensure that that happens.
Do you foresee a situation where, excuse me, once more the courts are going to have to intervene here as they had to do perhaps with Ngandla?
Yes. So the problem is, of course, that one will have to, as I said, some of this is political, but if, of course, there is a failure on the part of Parliament, as there was a failure on the part of Parliament with Nkandla, and we also know from the Zondo report, a failure generally to hold people who are involved in state capture accountable. If clever lawyers can frame a case that is actually based on the law and not just on the politics, it might well get to that at some point. Of course, we are not nearly there yet.
Good to speak to you, sir. Thank you for your time.